Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm going to share my screen and we will jump right in. I think I see maybe one or two new faces today. So if that's true, let me say first and foremost, thank you extremely well for joining. Do appreciate your time and hopefully there'll be something shared that helps you in your Tableau journey. Okay, we're going to just jump right in. Our previous Lunch and Learn was focused on leveraging layout containers in Tableau, how to use them, what to look for, visual cues that Tableau Desktop gives you while you're developing. And we ran out of time. I wanted to show one of the more recent aspects of layout containers. And I promised that I would start this session doing that. So that's what we're going to do. That's where we're going to start. And then we'll jump into navigation buttons and how to use them. What are they? How to use them, how to create them, how to leverage them in Tableau, and some of the possibilities. Okay, so as you can see from our menu here, we're going to talk about hamburger. Should be hamburger. Let's go ahead and correct that right now. Don't like misspellings. All right, hamburger. There we go. All right, so we're going to talk about how to create a hamburger menu. First off, hey Dwight, what is a hamburger menu? Great question. Here's what a hamburger menu is. See this little icon here? If you see hamburger commercials, it looks sort of like a hamburger. Yeah, right? Two buns, slice of meat in the middle. There you go. That's a hamburger or a hamburger icon. So a hamburger menu is a menu that's triggered by clicking this icon, right? And so I do have a hamburger menu already created. There it is. And I'm going to hide it. And then I'll show it again and we'll start navigating. So I'm going to jump to dashboard 1, go back home, jump to dashboard 2, go back home, jump to dashboard 3, and so on. Okay, so the question is, how do we build a menu like this, right? Um, you can imagine, and maybe I'll just do this so you can see it. Let's put a worksheet under here. Let's add, let's see, there we go. Let's add a worksheet under here. And then we'll say entire view, do that. Let's add a little bit of style to this. Put a blank up here, and let's make the blank 52. Okay. All right, there we go. So now we have a dashboard, and we also have a menu to navigate, right? All right. And so I'm going to show you how to create this type of menu in Tableau. Okay. Um, yeah, we'll just walk through that. And these links right here, they just jump to different dashboards in the workbook. Okay. All right. So how do we build a hamburger menu? Well, let's start from scratch. Number one, the first thing you do to build a hamburger menu is you drag, and this is key. Hamburger menus only work with floating layout containers. Okay. Floating layout containers, not tiled. So in Tableau, in order to toggle something between floating and tiled, all you have to do is drag and drop it while holding down the shift key. So if you hold down the Shift key, and which I'm going to do now, and I drag a horizontal container to the dashboard, this is what it looks like, right? If you see something like that, that means that whatever you're dragging, whatever this is, this rectangle is that I'm dragging, when I drop it, it's going to drop in a floating style, okay, and not tiled. If I drag something in tiled onto a dashboard, it looks like this. It just covers the whole area that where you're dragging it, right? So once again, visual cues in Tableau really inform you about what you're doing. So this is a floating object. So I'm going to drop it right there, okay? And you'll see there's a little note in the empty layout container that I just dropped, which is a horizontal container. It says hold down shift to drop floating objects into this container. Now, you don't have to actually do that, and we're not going to do that. In keeping with my recommendations on interacting with layout containers from the previous Lunch and Learn, I'm going to drag 2 blank objects into this container. See where I drag it, and it turns light gray with a solid blue border. That tells me whatever I'm dragging, I'm going to drop it right into that container. Gray borders are dashboard objects. Blue borders are layout containers. I'm going to drag a second blank into this object, and since I know it's a horizontal object, I'm looking for the light blue line either to the left or right, because in horizontal containers, objects are aligned side by side. So there we go. We've now got a floating horizontal layout container with 2 objects inside of it. Now, in order to create our menu, I'm going to use navigation buttons, which is the next topic that we're going to talk about. So I won't spend too much time telling you how I do this. I'm just going to drop them in and go. Okay. I think that was a blank. There we go. We'll make this one go to the hamburger menu, and we're going to call it home. I'll talk about these in a second. And then I'll do a second one to page 2-1. Okay. So now what we have, and I'm going to double click my handle so that you can see how many objects we have inside of our floating horizontal layout container, right? I've got a blank here. I've got a navigation button here, a navigation button here, and a blank here. And to make this look a little bit more friendly, menu friendly, I'm going to change the height of the overall floating layout container. So that's wonderful, Dwight. How do we make this a menu? Hide and show. Well, the good thing is that layout containers, when they are floating, they have an additional feature that Tableau makes available to you, which I'll show you right now under the More Options menu, and it's called Add, Show, and Hide button right here. It may be hard to read. It just says Add, Show, Hide button. Now, when I click that, a button appears. An object appears on the dashboard. Now, this object is floating as well. Okay, so you can drag it and position it wherever you want to. Okay, now inside of Tableau, this is a general thing which you'll see when we get started talking about navigation buttons. In order to interact with a button inside of Tableau Desktop, because ultimately, if you publish this to Tableau server, this dashboard is going to be a web page, right? It's going to be, HTML for the most part in JavaScript. So in order to interact with a button in Tableau Desktop, you have to hold down the Alt key. You can Alt click buttons inside of Tableau Desktop and be able to interact with their functionality. So if I click it once, menu is gone. If I hold down the Alt key and click it again, menu is there, right? And if I hold this button, Alt click, it takes me to dashboard 1. If I hold down this button, Alt click, it just takes me back to, another dash or the hamburger dashboard, which I showed when we first started. So that's how you build a menu. Now, I used a horizontal layout container with some blanks and some navigation buttons, but there's nothing stopping you from building a vertical layout container and using show and hide. Here's the thing that I'm going to caution you against. Remember, show and hide is only available for layout containers when they are floating. And you can see I can hover, and if I hold the Alt key, I can toggle my menu on and off at will. But this is sort of a user experience nightmare to have a menu floating over a visualization. That's not good, right? And so in order to avoid that, here's one of the drawbacks of using hamburger menus or menus in general in Tableau. I'm calling them hamburger menus simply because of the icon that appears that is shown in order to show the menu, right? It looks like a hamburger. You can just call them menus. That's totally fine. All right. So how do we get around this? Well, the best way to get around this, since I am advocating for everyone to begin using layout containers, is to carve out a space on your dashboard for the menu where you want it to appear and be hidden. It accomplishes two things. So I'm going to add a vertical container to my dashboard, and I'm going to put my worksheet inside of my vertical container and make sure that covers the whole area. And then on top of the worksheet inside the vertical container, I'm going to put a blank. The reason I'm going to put a blank up there is because I want this blank, which is tiled, by the way, right? This object is a tiled object. My menu is a floating object, okay? So the tiled object, I'm going to change its height to, I don't know, 60 characters, 60 pixels. And the reason I'm doing that is because my menu toggle icon and the menu itself, I want it to have an area where it's not obstructing something when it shows, when it appears, and when it's hidden, right? So let's take this, double click our handle so we can get the entire container and put that up there, right? So I have an area, here's the blank. Because these are floating, they just sit on top of the blank, okay? Now, in Tableau, there is something that's, well, okay, I'll say this. In Tableau, there is something that's known as the Z layer. Z layer. You can think of the Z layer as stacking, things stacking on top of one another. So I have something here, I can stack something on top of it, and then stack something on top of it, and that sort of thing. When you deal with floating objects, this Z layer becomes really important. Why? Because if my blank, for example, this is my blank, if I float it, and if you click an object on Tableau, you can actually change its Z order or its, here, let me show you what this is like. You can change its floating order. You can bring it to the front or send it to the back, just based on whatever you desire. It's critical to understand when you start using menus, because if you're not aware of this, you could have something sitting on top of your menu that prevents a user from interacting with your menu. I'm going to do this for example. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and drag a blank up here, and I'm going to put a blank right on top of my menu. Okay. I'm just going to put a floating blank right on top. And for its floating order, I'm going to bring it to the absolute front. So in floating orders, bring to front means bring to the highest Z order. Bring forward means bring it one layer forward from whatever is behind it. Bring it a layer forward or bring it a layer back. So bring to front means bring to the absolute front. Bring forward means bring one layer forward. Send to back means send back one layer. Send backward means send it to the absolute minimal layer, send it to the back, send it behind or under everything, okay? So I'm gonna bring it to the front. Now, when I bring it to the front, I have a blank sitting on top here. When I click my Alt key, it's impossible for me to interact with my button. I can't click my button. And the reason I can't click my button is because that floating blank is laying on top. It has a higher Z order than my menu button. So you got to be careful about stacking objects on top of one another in Tableau. This really only pertains to floating objects, okay? Floating. Because when you have a tiled object, there is nothing that allows you to change the order of its Z order, right? Or its layer order, okay? All right. Now that we've covered that, that's how you build a hamburger menu. Let's see, are there any questions? I'll open up the chat really quick, and then we're going to move to navigation buttons. I want to make sure we don't run out of time today. Any questions on how to create a hamburger menu? It's really simple, right? Float a layout container, put whatever you want to in that container, use the type of container that'll give you the type of menu you want, right? If you want a horizontal menu, use a horizontal container. If you want a vertical menu, use a vertical container. And these buttons, actually, you can edit them, right? So you can make it an image button, or you can make it a text button, right? So a text button would be show menu, apply. Now, because that was a little bitty square, we're going to have to resize this so that we can see it, but I'll open it up so you can see it. All right, so that's a button now that says show menu. Okay, and it works the exact same way, right? Show menu, there's my menu. Now I have to resize, I'll have to reposition my menu, of course. Okay, and here's, oh, there we go. Let's show it first. Then I can reposition it. There we go. So we'll bring that over a little bit so that, and we're going to get into navigation buttons, styling them in a second. Okay. All right. So if I do that, then hide my menu, show my menu, right? Okay. So that button doesn't have to be a hamburger menu. Could be a text menu if you like. And you can change the styling of this, which you're going to get into in a second. Okay. There are no questions. Let's move forward to introducing navigation buttons in Tableau. Let's get that 2 out of there. That's caught my attention. All right. Okay, so first off, what are navigation buttons in Tableau? First off, where are they? Here it is right here. It says navigation. What is it? Well, a navigation button is a new feature, relatively new. I've been working with Tableau since 2012. I can tell you there were no such thing as navigation buttons, and we had to use all type of creative methods to, if we wanted to build a dashboard with a menu system inside of it, we had to use all type of creative methods in order to get that done in Tableau. You know, sometimes people take a BI tool and they want to turn it into an application. They want it to behave like an application, when Tableau really is not an application interface, right? It's designed to build data visualizations. That's what it specializes in. But there are times when you want a dashboard that has, you know, multiple layers of interactivity, not only filtering, slicing, and dicing, but also navigation, right? All right. Well, Tableau got it after a couple of years. They were really stringent about putting features like that in the software, hide and show, to toggle things on and off, buttons, which is really not a data visualization object or component or contributing object, right? Doesn't have any analytic value, but they came around, all right? So navigation buttons is one of those come arounds. So this is where you add a navigation button. And let's take a look at what a navigation button or the properties that you have access to when you add a navigation button to a dashboard. Now, you'll notice I just drug a new navigation button to my dashboard, and it simply says navigation. Now, when you add a navigation to a dashboard, here's the first thing you should know. If you just drag it and drop it, it does nothing. I'm clicking it, and it's doing absolutely nothing. It says navigation, and it's navigating absolutely nowhere. That's the first thing you should know. The reason for that behavior is because Tableau doesn't know what you want to do with this button or what your intentions are for the button. So when you first add a navigation button, it does absolutely nothing. In order to configure it to do something, you can simply double click it, or you can click the more options arrow and click edit button. Okay. All right. The reason it's not called a button, but it's called navigation, is because buttons just don't allow you to do just about anything. They have a specific purpose. All right. And that purpose at the current time inside of Tableau is for you to navigate to other Tableau content within the workbook. Okay. You can have a button that does nothing, like, for example, let's say we just want this to say, we don't want it to do anything, right? Now, the challenge with it not doing anything is that you can't change this text. Well, let's try it. Nav buttons. Ah, there we go. So you can have a button that doesn't do anything. And the reason you don't want it to do anything is because maybe it's a label, right? Okay, you can use a button for that purpose. But using a button for a label is, I would say, overkill, especially since you have a text object that can just serve that purpose, right? But anyway, there's no cost to using navigation buttons. So if you wanted to do that, have at it, right? Okay, so in the navigate to section is where you point the button, right? What is the button going to do? So let's choose to show the hamburger menus in Tableau dashboard when we click this button. Now, second thing you should know, when you drag buttons to a dashboard, they're gray by default. If you set the color, background color for the button, it won't change until you specify what it connects to. So for example, I'm going to set the background of this button to red. I'm going to click apply, and you'll see it clearly is not red. The reason it's not red is because the button itself is disabled, right? We're familiar with this. You go on the web, you want to click on something, but you don't have access. That thing usually is grayed out, right? It's not active, in other words. So gray buttons means the button itself is inactive. You can change the label of the button, but you can't interact with the button. Setting properties, font properties, and that sort of thing. Let's try font properties. Let's change that to green. Oh, you can change the font property, but you can't change the background color. And so a gray background means the button is disabled. All right. To enable the button, you simply point it to something. All right. So there you go. Now our button, the background is red, and we'll change our text to white so it doesn't have such a horrific contrast to the background. And now we have an active button. And if I hold down the Alt key and click my button, it'll take me to my hamburger menu, right? The hamburger menu dashboard. Okay. Other features of the hamburger button, of the navigation button. There are two types of buttons. There's a text button where you have text on a label, and if you don't type anything for title, it'll just say navigation. Okay. If you enter a title, that's what shows up. You have a maximum of 80 characters for the number of characters you can assign to a navigation button. Why? Well, if you have a navigation button with a paragraph in it, that could be a bit of a challenge. You should probably use a text object for the paragraph and then a call to action for the button. Okay, just a recommendation, right? For the font, you actually get to change both the font face or font family, the size, some attributes of the font, bold, italic, or underline, and you get to change the colors. Now, the colors are a bit restrictive because it doesn't allow for custom colors. That's one aspect I don't like. I'm going to add that under drawback in a second. But you can change the font and then you can change the background. For the background, you do have custom colors, right? You can add custom colors in here, and I'm going to use the Metro Health Orange for this background. Let's see. And then you can actually change the borders. And I have some examples of button types, right? Style types. So you can see that there. Finally, there's a tooltip for a button. So by default, I'm going to leave that blank for a second. If you don't use a tooltip, there is a tooltip that'll show up, right? If you hover over a button, it says navigate to hamburger menus in Tableau. And then in parenthetical, it says Alt plus click to navigate. And the reason it says that is because that's what you have to do in Tableau in order to activate a button. You have to hold down the Alt key. If you just click it, it just selects it. Okay. All right. Oh, yeah. Forgot. Okay. All right, so those are the attributes of navigation buttons. As you can see here, I have a button that doesn't have a background, but it does have an orange border, and the text is the same way. The top button, this is a button which is an icon button. So instead of having a text label, it's an image, right? And I just chose an image from my computer, this image here. Okay. Now, for the top button, I did something a little bit different. So I have a navigation button here and I have a text object here, right? Sometimes you have menus that have menu items that have icons that go along with it. Well, that's how you can do it. And if I double click my handle, I can see that my navigation button and my text object both are inside a horizontal layout container. Okay. So I'm using a horizontal layout container. And if I change the height of this container, it automatically changes the size of my button. It's 52 pixels right now. I'm going to change it to 40 so you can see what happens, right? So nice little style, right? And changing the height of the container, if you begin to use layout containers with buttons, automatically changes the size of the button itself. Okay. So that's the first style button, icon. Second style is text. And then, of course, you can turn on borders or turn off borders. You can have a background and a border if you like. Let's see what that looks like. So I have none right now, but I'm going to turn on a very light gray background. There you go, right? You can have a solid button, or you can have a button with no color and no background at all, just a menu of items, right? And they're all buttons. They all work. So to demonstrate this, we'll jump to dashboard 1. I'll go back home. And home is now my hamburger menu. So let's see. So they all work. Now, let's get back to my slide. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits and drawbacks. Benefits and drawbacks. Be this and add a new one. Are there any questions so far?
So Dwight, when do you recommend to use these menus, especially a Tableau workbook that has many dashboards in it?
Yeah, when do I use menu? So yeah, let's talk about, I'll answer your question in a second, if you don't mind.
No, sure, no problem.
Okay, so let's run through this. First thing, navigation buttons are an alternative to show sheets as tabs. Now, some of you may not know what show sheets as tabs means, so I'm going to show you exactly what it means. When we say show sheets as tabs, what are we talking about? And this, by the way, is built-in behavior uh, with a Tableau dashboard. Okay. Um, when you go into a dashboard, uh, depending on the settings that you choose when you publish, that dashboard will have a set of tabs up here. And each tab represents the views that you chose to publish to the Tableau server. And the attribute or the feature that you can enable or disable is show sheets as tabs, right? And then you have a little drop down here that allows you to see a vertical list of all of the tabs that would show up, okay? Now, there's something strange in Tableau, which I noticed after we upgraded the server the last time. If you have a lot of tabs, your dashboard is no longer centered in the middle of the page of the screen. And the reason that happens is because with so many tabs, Tableau automatically left aligns your dashboard. I don't like it, but you should know that it's there, right? Let's choose a different workbook. Nope, that one has a lot of tabs. Let's see. Let's try this one. Right. So see, when you have a small number of tabs, the dashboard itself is center aligned. But when you have a large amount of tabs, they're not center aligned. So your question was, when should a designer choose to use navigation buttons versus show sheets as tabs? It's totally up to you, right? There's no prescription for using navigation buttons. So I'll give you a couple of thought processes that I use. First and foremost is screen real estate, something I'm going to call screen real estate. It's the area that you have to display your visualizations and, more importantly, communicate the story behind the data to your end user. That area is premium real estate. And because the new template design has this border up here, which is 60 pixels, you don't have access to that, right? You can't change that if you're going to align to the the recommended template style. So you have essentially, the height of this is 768. If this is 60, you have 708 pixels from here, approximately 700 pixels from here to the bottom to display your visualization. So how do I decide whether I want to use navigation buttons? Well, these navigation buttons, this column right here, this vertical layout container is 200 pixels wide. I've got 1,366 pixels from left to right, 700 pixels from top to bottom that I can use to display my visualization. One of the ways you can determine whether you use navigation buttons is if you have enough screen real estate, right? Are you going to have to sacrifice screen real estate to show a menu where you could be showing a visualization? I would argue visualizations have more importance than menus, but here's the next part. Here's the caveat. At the end of the day, the dashboard that you're designing is not for you, right? It's for the people who are going to consume it, the people who are going to use it. And if in their mind a menu over show sheets as tabs is preferable, I would say that is a premium and a premier and an advisable use of screen real estate. Why? Because if you create a dashboard and nobody likes it, nobody wants to use it, did you really create something, right? At the end of the day, what we want to do is build dashboards that make people smarter about the information that we're sharing. And if in their world that happens by them easily being able to jump between dashboards, i.e. a menu, then go ahead and take up the screen real estate and use a menu, right? All right, so there's no hard and fast rule on when to use buttons. It really is based on all the requirements and other factors. But screen real estate is one of the things to take into consideration, and higher on the chopping order than screen real estate is customer satisfaction. Okay. All right. Use case for navigation buttons. Hey, they just allow you to jump to dashboards, worksheets, and stories inside of your workbook. And they are much better than the old style way that we used to have to create buttons before navigation buttons came along. I'm going to show you how we used to do that. See, I have something called an old button here, old style button, right? Now, this button is going to take me to a different dashboard than the one that I'm on. I'm on the Introduction to Tableau Navigation Buttons dashboard. When I click it, watch what happens. I jump to dash one. So it works. It works just like a navigation button, but there's some significant differences to this button. First off, did anybody recognize that when I clicked this button, it was gray, and now it's light blue? That's the first thing. So prior to the advent of navigation buttons, when we wanted to create menus like these, we would use worksheets. Here's the drawback of using a worksheet. You can use a worksheet to jump to a dashboard. Really simple. To filter action, I'll show you how it's built. You'll notice the way I styled the button is black text with a gray background. I click it and it does what it's supposed to do. It takes me to the place where I wanted to go, dash one. But if I go back, doing that, using a worksheet as a button has a unintended drawback, which is anytime you select content on a Tableau worksheet, the selection is visually indicated by a light blue shading, okay? Thereby changing the color of your button, okay? So that was a drawback. And I'll show you how I did this. So if we go to the worksheet, I simply created a calculated field called button. And that calculated field just has the label of my button inside double quotes, right? And then I added the button to the dashboard. And under dashboard actions, I created an action called go to dash one. And it's a filter action or a sheet action. When you create action menus in Tableau, there's a whole set of type of action types that you can create: filter, highlight, go to URL. Well, there's a go to sheet action, right? So it's an action that allows you to, when you click something on a worksheet, for you to go to a different sheet, right? That's what the purpose of this particular action filter is, or action is. So you just specify what sheet you want to go to down here, right? So here's the source sheet, and there's the target sheet. And I'm activating the button based on select, not hover, not menu. And I'm going to dash one. Okay. All right. There we go. This is a drawback. So I created this button to show you what buttons were like prior to navigation buttons. I don't recommend that you do this. They really confuse users, especially when they turn light blue. In addition to them turning light blue, another added unintended consequence, and I want you to see this, is when I click this button, it does what I'm supposed to do. But when I go back to the page and I click it again, deselection happens. So I just clicked it, it turned from light blue to gray, but the button didn't actually do anything. Okay, and the reason it didn't do anything is because it was simply deselecting from my previous selection in which it did do something, right? So there's a drawback to creating worksheets as buttons. Don't do it. You don't need it, right? Just use navigation buttons. All right, what are the benefits of navigation buttons? Number one, ease of use. You can style your buttons the way you like. There's no programming involved. User experience. That's key. That's number one. People love your dashboard if they use your dashboard. That's the Shangri-La of your Tableau development, right? You want people to use it, right? They are more responsive than filter actions or actions in general. Okay. And I just noted that. They're not as clunky as having worksheets as navigation buttons. There's a bunch of other problems with using worksheets as navigation buttons. So they really solve some challenges inside of Tableau. What are the drawbacks? Well, here's a number one drawback. Big pet peeve of mine. I've been developing web pages for like 20 years, and one of the greatest things that you can do when you're developing multiple HTML pages is not to have to build this menu on every page. That's number one. Most of you probably haven't noticed this, but I want you to notice the variances in these menus as I go across the pages. Let's jump to dash one. There's a menu at the bottom that's not there. Everything else seems to look the same. Well, let's go to dash two. Oh, I have an icon menu, a navigation button that uses an icon, but I'm missing the text. In addition, I'm missing my old style button down here. Let's go to dash three. Man, on dash three, the color of the second button is wrong. It's not even enabled to begin with. And then the top button is totally disabled. If I click it, nothing happens, right? So the first drawback is that navigation buttons are not reusable. Okay, so how does this impact you? Well, if you choose to use navigation buttons, get ready. And I'm going to give you a piece of advice. If you choose to use navigation buttons inside of your dashboard, and you have 6, 7 different dashboards inside of your workbook, finish your navigation buttons first. Build your dashboards, finish your navigation buttons. Finish your worksheets. Build your navigation buttons in the dashboard, in the first template dashboard, and then make sure you finish those buttons, and then duplicate the dashboard itself. Because when you duplicate a dashboard, the buttons automatically can duplicate it. It's not possible to reuse a set of navigation buttons. Okay, that's the thing you should know. And for example, let's go to dash one. You'll see on dash one, this button doesn't have the gray background that I changed when we were talking about changing backgrounds, right? So this one has a gray background, but this one does not. All right. Inconsistencies with menu items will cause your users to ask questions. You don't want that, right? So that's the first drawback. Second drawback is there's no visual feedback. And what do I mean by visual feedback? Well, in most common modern web applications, when you're on the page that when you arrive on a page that you got there by a menu item, that menu item is usually highlighted from the other items to let you know where you are. Breadcrumbs, cookie crumbs, whatever you want to call it, right? You don't have that in Tableau. Now, you can sort of create that in Tableau, but once again, it's manual. It's not programmable, or it's not settable or configurable. Okay, so I consider that a drawback. And the reason I consider it a drawback is this: if all of your buttons are the same, if I'm on home, I want to know that's where I am, home. If I'm on dash one, the menu that led me to dash one should tell me or inform me that I'm on dash one. So I consider that a drawback. And then finally, no custom colors for the button text. Now, tips. I've already given you one. I've used it multiple times and mentioned it multiple times. If you want to interact with a button inside of Tableau Desktop prior to publishing to Tableau Server, just use the Alt. Press down the Alt key while you're clicking the button. That'll show you what the button will do. Tooltips are helpful, okay? When users hover over buttons, if a tooltip shows up to tell them where they're going to go, that's really good. And you can be a little bit more descriptive than just the text on the button, because remember, you have a limit of 80 characters for the button text. You really shouldn't have a button with 80 characters, by the way. That's just a listen. If I see a dashboard with a button that has close to 80 characters in it, I'm gonna complain to Anthony. We're gonna shut down. We're gonna shut that workbook down. No, I'm kidding. Use your tooltip, right? It is the place for you to include a verbose description of the button if you choose to do so. Now, the truth of the matter is, um, if you're using navigation buttons, users are probably going to click before they read. Keep that in mind. Okay. All right. I think that's it for navigation buttons, and I don't have any questions today. So this was a relatively quick lunch and learn. We've got 15 minutes left, and I am done. Questions? No questions?
Hey, Anthony. I'm sorry, Dwight. It's
You are
Kevin. Can
very
you hear me?
welcome. You are more than welcome.
Dwight, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Um, so I have a question with the navigation button. So you can use them to go back and forth between sheets, but can you use them to, say, launch a URL to redirect them to like a web page?
No, you
Okay.
cannot. Not navigation buttons.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, you can use images for that. Did you know that?
You can use images. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I drag an image onto my navigation button and I choose my home icon and target URL is going to be my company website, and we'll fit the image and center the image, and we'll just apply. When I click that button, it takes me right to the web. And that's an icon button. That's not good. Oh, I didn't type it right. So that's one option, and this can be a text button as well, right? I mean, well, this is an image, so but does that answer your question? I don't know if that answers your question. You have to let me know whether that answers your question or not.
Yeah, that'll be good because right now I'm using it based on an action button from the selection of like a sheet, which I don't like because, like you said, it does that kind of blue when
Yeah,
you select it. When you deselect it, it doesn't do anything. So
you got it. Man,
this
that
will
thing drove us
this will
nuts
be
for
helpful.
years. And it was the only option we had for menus. It used to just drive us nuts. We have to do all type of workarounds, man. But anyway, there is a workaround to the blue thing, but the workaround is really clunky, man. So you have to take a 1 by 1 pixel image. So you create your menu, and there's something that's known as a tracking image, a tracking ping. It's an image that's 1 by 1 pixel, but it's actually transparent. It doesn't have anything in it. And so if you use that as an image and you float it over the button, you can then give that thing the URL. And when they click the button from the user's perspective, they're none the wiser. They think they're clicking a button and it's taking them to where they want to go, but you don't get the blue highlighting part, right? So anyway, um, yeah. So that's how you would do that. And if you still want to use worksheets for, so, so let me give a scenario where using worksheets is appropriate. There are times when you want to create menus from your data source. In other words, the menu labels come from a dimension in your data source, and those dimensions could change, and you want your menu to automatically update. Well, if you want to do something like that, um, and you want to use that as a menu, you can do that as well. And so that's where that 1 pixel overlay could potentially come into place. But it's really takes a whole lot of work and not very high value return or the amount of work that it takes. Okay, any other questions? Okay, I'm going to turn the recorder off. I want to thank you all for joining. We will definitely see you next week on Tuesday for our next Lunch and Learn. Hopefully, it will be informative and equip you with something that's beneficial. Have a great afternoon.